Hello, hello. We are back for chapter 11. Um, Again, we are reading Terrible Typhoid Mary by Susan Campbell Bartoletti. So far, it's very interesting. I personally am learning a ton about the early 1900s and how they handled disease and things of that nature. So it's very interesting stuff. I kind of feel bad for Mary a little bit. She's going through a lot, and that's a lot of information to have to take in at one time, and have to be isolated. And she's being held against her will, and tests are being done, and I think I would kind of feel like a lab rat. Um, but we live in a different time period, and that's not how things happen anymore. So I guess we learned from our mistakes, you could say. We're going to read chapter 11. It is called In Which Mary is Banished Like a Leper. Remember in the last chapter it talked about what leprosy was? So if someone is called a leper, they are referring to them in the manner of, like, you have a skin condition, get away from me, don't touch me, it's contagious, get away, basically. Okay. At 16th Street, hospital attendants escorted Mary onto a special steamer reserved for patients. The steamer carried her up to the East River, and she arrived on North Brother Island, frightened and angry and more resistant than ever. The island had once been an uninhabited bit of land. Over the years, the city filled in the shady, marshy ground and built a strong seawall to buffer the breakers. Its 10 acres were transformed into 13. In 1885, Riverside Hospital was moved from Blackwell's Island, now Roosevelt Island, to North Brother Island. The island became a temporary treatment and quarantine center for measles, smallpox, tuberculosis, scarlet fever, typhus fever, not to be confused with typhoid fever, patients. Hospital patients came from the city's tenements. In 1897, a police reporter named Jacob Rees described the island as a garden spot, saying, "Today, where once was a waste of land, are broad and shaded lawns, winding, well-kept walks, trees, shrubs, and flowers, handsome, substantial buildings, and hospital pavilions or wards. But," he added, "it can hardly be said that people are anxious to reside here." Isolated from the other patients, Mary was given a small bungalow that sat on the riverbank. The cottage had a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and a bathroom, as well as such modern conveniences as gas and/or plumbing and electricity. She had a small fox terrier for company. They gave her a dog. Sorry. Her identity was withheld. Health department reporters referred to Mary simply as a woman who had served as a cook. From her cottage windows, Mary could watch a ferry boat glide past. She could see gas tanks on the distant Bronx shore. At night, she could hear the East River lap against the rocks. By the time Mary arrived on North Brother Island, the emotional stress of her arrest and quarantine had taken its toll. "When I first came here, I was so nervous and almost prostrated that with grief and trouble," she later wrote in a letter addressed to the editor of the New York American. "My eyes began to twitch and the left eyelid became paralyzed and would not move." But the letter was never published. For 6 months, Mary couldn't close her left eyelid. According to her, no eye specialist examined her, even though one routinely visited other patients. The twitching may have been caused by fatigue or stress, or even a benign tumor that later went away on its own. And Mary's inability to close her eyelid could have been caused by an underlying medical condition, a psychological syndrome, or even a reaction to drugs. Mary asked for an eye cover but was not given one. During the day, she cupped her eyes shut with her hand. At night, she tied a bandage around her head to keep her eye closed. Her eye eventually improved. In the letter to the New York American, she wrote, "However, my eye got better thanks to the Almighty God." Whatever Mary was about to say next, she must have changed her mind and crossed out, "and no thanks," and then just ended the sentence. 2 or 3 times a week, attendants collected fecal, urine, and blood specimens. Sometimes the results were positive, other times they were negative. This indicates that Mary was an intermittent carrier of typhoid fever. The health department tried experimental drugs on her. Doctors prescribed urotropin, a pharmaceutical drug made from a combination of ammonia and formaldehyde. Formaldehyde is what they use to embalm bodies. I took the urotropin for about 3 months, and all told, if I should have continued, it would certainly have killed me, for it was very severe. Everyone knows, whoever is acquainted with any kind of medicine, that it is used for kidney trouble. The drug known as urotropin was not effective on typhoid germs living in the gallbladder. The medication was administered to eliminate typhoid germs from the urine of patients who had recovered from typhoid, but not patients such as Mary. Another doctor gave her some pills. She doesn't say what kind. A saline mixture called an anti-ototox and brewer's yeast. It was believed that these medications and remedies would disinfect Mary's gastrointestinal canal. One doctor called anti-ototox a proved measure and said that combined with colonic irrigation, treatment is most effective. It was not. Such medical experimentation was fraught with danger, something that George Soper acknowledged. Anything that will kill the bacilli will apparently kill the individual who is the locus, as we say for those bacteria, he said. But to Soper, a typhoid epidemic had to be prevented at any cost. The danger from the typhoid carrier must be stamped out, he told the New York Times. Until it is stamped out, typhoid will still be with us. The health department officials frightened Mary, for it seemed that no doctors could agree on where the problem lay and how to cure her. "I am a little afraid of the people, and I have a good right to be," Mary admitted in her letter. "When I came to the department, they said that the germs, were in my intestinal tract. Later, another said that they were in the muscles of my bowels. And lately they thought of the gallbladder." To Mary, it seemed as though her fear had been realized. The doctors had quarantined her for the purpose of medical research. The summer of 1907 ended. Mary turned 38 in September. Christmas came and went. So did New Year's, and it was now 1908. The hospital permitted visitors 2 days a week, but the ferry stopped running during the winter months. Later, reporters described Mary's life on the island, claiming that she lived in total isolation, shunned by the nurses and other attendants. A keeper 3 times a day brings food to her door, then flees from it as if from a pestilence, wrote the New York American. They do not dread leprosy, smallpox, scarlet fever, and a score of other diseases, wrote another newspaper, the New York Call. But they avoided this disseminator of typhoid germs and left her entirely to herself. This wasn't entirely true. By now, Mary had made a close friend, a 23-year-old registered nurse named Adelaide Jane Offspring. The 2 women were often seen together, walking the paths on the island. Offspring later wrote that Mary was permitted to have visitors. Mary looked for ways to keep busy. "Often I helped nurse the patients on the island, and Often the children will have no one else to take care of them when they are very sick, she later told a New York World reporter. And of course, she had her small dog for company. Mary continued to lobby for her release. I never had typhoid in my life, and I have always been healthy, she told a New York American reporter in 1909. Why should I be banished like a leper and compelled to live in solitary confinement with only a dog for a companion? After 10 months, hospital officials considered discharging her. The resident physician asked her where she would live if she were discharged. Naturally, I said New York, Mary wrote. After all, New York City had been her home for 24 years, ever since she had immigrated from Ireland. But New York City Department of Health officials didn't want the responsibility. So there was a stop to put my getting out of there, said Mary. When the supervising nurse heard that Mary's release was refused, she told Mary to write to the officials, saying that if she were released, she would go to Connecticut to live with her sister. That would make her Connecticut's problem, not New York's. But Mary wouldn't lie. Well, I have no sister in Connecticut, or any other state in the U.S., she told the nurse, who then called her a hopeless case. Mary never said why she didn't consider returning to Ireland. Perhaps she couldn't afford passage. Perhaps she had no family left in Ireland. Perhaps she had good reason to leave Ireland and never return. More than likely, as a naturalized citizen of the United States, Mary knew that she had the right to stay in America. Mary knew, and she was determined to fight her case and clear her name. I have been told that all I had to do was apply to Dr. Darlington and promise to leave the state and live under another name, and I could have my freedom, Mary told a New York World reporter. But this I will not do. I will be either cleared or die where I am now. A year passed. The whole time, Mary remained determined to win her freedom. In July 1908, she arranged for her urine and feces to be analyzed by a private laboratory in Manhattan. Her friend August Brehoff served as courier. One visitation day, Brehoff rode the ferry across the river, donned the required long gown and high rubber overshoes at the dock, made his way to Mary's cottage, collected her specimens, and then took the ferry back to 16th Street. He delivered the specimens to Ferguson Laboratories at 121 West 42nd Street. Over the next 9 months, Brehoff delivered at least 10 specimens, taking a brief hiatus over the winter months when the ferry wasn't running. Each time the report came back, this specimen gives negative results for typhoid. Not one specimen showed evidence of typhoid germs. Ironically, during these same weeks, Mary's specimens tested positive 8 times in the New York City Department of Health laboratory. But the Ferguson Laboratories results bolstered Mary's hopes. They confirmed what she had been saying all along, that she didn't have typhoid and had never suffered from the disease. The results reinforced her distrust in the city health department. Why did the results contradict each other? It's possible that the specimens that reached the Ferguson Laboratories weren't fresh. After all, Brehoff was the delivery man. It is also possible that Ferguson's technicians were careless or inefficient, thus tainting the results. And as it's been noted, Mary was an intermittent carrier. Perhaps some weeks the typhoid germs just didn't show up. It's also possible that Mary's worst fears were true, that the city had kidnapped her and quarantined her in order to conduct experimental medical research. Urged by Mary, August Brehoff approached Dr. Thomas Darlington, the Commissioner of Health at the time of Mary's arrest, asking when Mary would be discharged. Darlington didn't want to take responsibility for her release. I cannot let her go myself. He told Brehoff that the decision rested with another Board of Health doctor, William Studiford, who also didn't want the responsibility. He told Brehoff that given the number of people Mary had infected, he couldn't release her. But he had an idea. Perhaps Brehoff could convince Mary to agree to surgery to remove her gallbladder. He promised Brehoff that the best surgeon in town would perform the operation, or do the cutting, as Mary called it. Brehoff relayed the message to Mary, but she would not budge. "No knife will be put on me," said Mary. "I've nothing the matter with my gallbladder." In her letter, Mary explained that she could not trust doctors to cut her open when they couldn't even make up their minds on how to treat the germs they claimed were inside her. That's fair. I probably wouldn't either. More weary than ever, Mary worried that the doctors would etherize her and perform surgery just to experiment, or worse. The health department just wants to use that way of murdering me, she said. The hospital staff couldn't understand her reluctance. Wouldn't it not be better for you to have done that than to remain here as the supervising nurse? But Mary was adamant. Mary was no physician, but her instincts were right. Even today, surgery is never without risk, and surgery was much more dangerous in 1908. There was a good chance she might not survive. If the operation didn't kill her, an infection might. Antibiotics would not be discovered for another 34 years. Furthermore, even if she did survive the gallbladder removal, her condition might stay the same. For the typhoid bacteria can also be found in the ileum, spleen, and bone marrow. But George Soper didn't understand Mary's refusal. To him, it was just a gallbladder. "I understand that the gallbladder can be removed," he said. "Apparently, human beings can get along without it." While Mary was confined on North Brother Island, George Soper was making a name for himself. He traveled the country speaking about his great discovery. In April of 1907, 1 month after Mary's arrest, Soper delivered a paper called "The Work of a Chronic Typhoid Germ Distributor" before the Biological Society of Washington, D.C. He never mentioned Mary's name. He detailed his work and his discovery of the deadly cook. He published the same paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association during Mary's first month on North Brother Island. The paper and its discussion were published again in a journal called Science later that same year. Dr. William Hollock Park was also speaking and writing about Mary, without revealing her last name. In June 1908, Dr. Park presented a paper called "Typhoid Bacteria Carriers" before a session at the American Medical Association. 3 months later, the paper was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association. At the AMA session, Park addressed the question of the city's right to quarantine the cook. "The case of this woman brings up many interesting problems," he said. "Has the city a right to deprive her of liberty for perhaps her whole life? The alternative is to turn loose on the public a woman who is known to have infected at least 28 persons. Park was wrong. At this date, 24, not 28, cases had been attributed to Mary. Park noted that Mary was not the only healthy carrier in New York City. Other seemingly healthy people also shed typhoid bacteria in their feces, yet he considered it impractical to quarantine each and every healthy carrier, except as in the case of the cook already described. He didn't explain why Mary was the exception. In the discussion that followed Park's lecture, another physician referred to the cook as Typhoid Mary. The name stuck. Newspapers, doctors, health officials, and the public began referring to Mary as Typhoid Mary. The term would come to mean a polluted or troublemaking woman who should be avoided. For 2 years and 3 months, as Soper and Park delivered their lectures and published their papers, As they gained fame and notoriety within medical circles, Mary waited for the day when she could clear her name and win her release. My computer messed up, sorry. And then, one warm Sunday morning in June of 1909, Mary Mallon opened the Sunday magazine section of the New York American and saw her full name and likeness splashed across 2 lurid pages. Okay, so now she has tried to reach out to other laboratories to do these testings. She still doesn't want to have surgery to have her gallbladder removed. She still doesn't believe the doctors that are keeping her imprisoned. She's standing her ground. Come to find out, she's been in prison for over 2 years. I say in prison. She's been quarantined. So imagine these last 4 weeks, but on a much more severe level as compared to what Mary was going through at this time. Quite different. So think about it and try and imagine your life, how it would be different if you were living under the same circumstances that she is, as we are in the book.